Hi everyone, welcome to another comics loving edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. Delighted on this episode to be talking with longtime comics creator Roland Mann. Roland, thank you for jumping in, joining, and having a chat about comics with me.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I love to chat about comics.
As do I, and I'll mention a couple here. I know you have worked in the world of Malibu
Yep.
a good
Yep.
bit. Malibu with the all new Exiles and
Yep.
Nightman. Nightman was my favorite.
Cool.
You've also worked on The Ferret,
I did. Yep.
Cat and Mouse being
That's
another
right.
one of those from a different publisher. And then I know you've done some writing in the world of Planet of the Apes
I
as well.
did. Yeah,
Hmm.
that was a lot of fun. Uh, that project came about as a result of a freelancer calling up and pestering the publisher that I had a good relationship with them already, and they had they already had the Planet of the Apes license, and so I would just call them like once a week. Hey man, I got a Planet of the Apes idea. I got a Planet of the Apes idea. Finally, the editor up there said, "Okay, send me your idea." And he liked it, and so I got to do it. Planet of the Apes is one of my all-time favorite
Oh yeah.
sci-fi. I just that first movie because I saw it as a kid, right? That first movie just is still in my brain when the horses ride by, and the very first time we see the ape phases, I'm like,
Mhm,
oh
mhm.
man.
That was a really good impression of the soundtrack too. I enjoyed that.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Told you, it's seared in my brain. But so
Yeah.
I was excited to be able to get to play in that sandbox.
Yeah, that's very cool and definitely pop culture phenomenon for sure. Um,
It's
and
one of those. It's one of those that I don't have access to back issues of that anymore. It's one of those. I've been in the game long enough, I guess you could say that, when I'm looking through the cheap boxes, I find some of my work. I
Mhm,
will
mhm.
I will often, if it's cheap enough, if it's the cheap box, I'll often buy it because then I can take it to my table and resell it for cover price from me.
Yes, yeah.
Um, I never ever see any Planet of the Apes in the cheap boxes, right? And I guess it's just one of those things that folks have it and that they don't, it's not really a back issue because I
Mhm.
just don't see very many of those out in the wild. But what I like to say about that particular series is, for folks who know me, I'm a Southern guy. I like being in the South. I like a lot of things about the South.
Mhm,
Not
mhm.
perfect, but I like a lot of things about the South. And so, as a kid, growing up, for me, all of the stories were set in New York City, or
Mhm, mhm.
Metropolis, or all these big cities. I didn't grow up anywhere near a big city, right? I,
Right.
I was I wasn't a farm kid. My family's farmers, but I was a rural kid, and so I decided when I started writing comics, I said, well, if I can, I want to bring my characters to the South. Of course, a
Yeah.
lot of my stories are set in New Orleans because it's kind of the biggest cool city next to us. But for those who read the Blood of the Apes series that I wrote, it's set in futuristic Memphis.
Mhm, mhm.
Most of the ape stories are set in the tri-state area, New York, New Jersey, that area up there. But I set mine in Memphis, so we get to see some of the from the Graceland, right? We see the Elvis Cadillac, and if you're looking, you can see a little bit of the fence. And
Mhm,
um,
mhm.
for those who know, it used to be called um, oh shoot, the Memphis Pyramid. There, I think it's Bass Pro Shop now. But there's a Memphis Pyramid right there, and
Mhm.
so yeah, I got to work a lot of that in, and that was fun.
Yeah, yeah. I'm also a longtime resident of the South and rural person as well.
Oh,
Rural
excellent!
kid as well. So yeah, I can
So,
relate to that. Absolutely.
very cool.
Yeah.
So you can relate to riding your bicycle to the comic book shops or excuse me, the 7-Elevens and
Uh-huh,
the
uh-huh.
convenience stores searching for comic books.
Or the pharmacy or wherever you
Yeah,
could find them.
yep, the
The
spinner
corner
racks.
store. Yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
yep.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely. Was that kind of your way into visual storytelling? Was the spinner rack kind of the
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I always credit my mom for my affinity and my affection for reading and writing, because as a kid, I did not like to stay in the house. I was an outside kid. I came
Hmm.
home from school. I immediately went outside and started throwing dirt clods because we lived next to, like I said, we had 4 acres where we lived. And so we lived in a community kind of like that. There was a pastor on the other side of our land. So I'd have to go out there and throw dirt clods at the cows, right?
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I'd take I had my Star Trek figurines, and they had a cool ditch there that I would use to transport them to a foreign a foreign soil, and I would just rather play outside. So I didn't do a lot of reading, and my mom was always trying to figure out some way to get me to read. And one day we saw a spinner rack, and it had Captain America on it. I didn't know who the character was, though. And I was like, "Oh, cool! This looks so good, right? Right?" And you know how kids are. I'm like, "Oh, mom, can I have it? Can I have it?" And my mom and her brilliant wisdom said, "I'll get it for you on one condition, and that condition is that you read it and you tell me about what you read." So, oh, of course,
Nice,
mom,
nice.
anything. So she got it. I read it. I was introduced to all these brand new characters that I didn't know. It was the Avengers, and all these characters that I didn't know who they were, but I knew Captain America was so cool, and all these other characters were cool. But the story was continued, and I'm like, I I got to know what happened. So I'm like, Mom,
Right.
I need the next issue because the story's not finished. And she says, Well, okay, we'll go back to the store and we'll find it. That started my convenience store hopping, and then I was introduced to Spider-Man, and so yeah, it just my love for reading began there. And of course,
Hmm.
comics introduced me to things like H.G. Wells and Jules Verne. They
Hmm.
talked
Hmm.
about things like that, and so I'm like, well, who is this H.G. Wells guy? I gotta know who that is. And so I went and read First Men in the Moon, and oh shoot, the Martian book, War of the Worlds,
Hmm. Hmm.
and love those. And so that developed in me a love for reading. So that's how it all started.
Yeah, yeah. Science fiction often comes up on the show. I'm a big science fiction fan, so
I'll
it
bet.
definitely
Yeah,
connects. Yeah.
I'm especially a fan of classic science fiction.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
once it hits the 80s, ish, I know there's been some good stuff, so don't get me wrong, but once it hits
Mm.
the 80s, I get less interested in the content that they write. I still tend to, go back to Asimov. Asimov is one of my favorite.
Hmm.
Bradbury,
Oh, love Brett Barry. Yeah.
yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Hmm.
Things like There Will Come Soft Rains is probably my all-time favorite short story by
Hmm.
Bradbury.
Yeah.
Just and there's not a person in the story at all. It's amazing. If you've never read it, it's very short. It's post nuclear holocaust, in which the fully automated house
Hmm.
continues to run even though none of the people are alive.
Hmm.
Very
Hmm.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so speaking of writers and writing and crafting, what's it been like for you to sort of go from the writer side? And I know you've also worked as an editor, so
Mhm.
what's it been like to create on sort of both sides of the pen in that way?
Yeah, it's funny because my shift to editing was probably more natural. Looking back on it, it was probably more natural than a lot of people, because one of the things that I had done, I grew up in Mississippi. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go to New York City to work in comics. I wanted to, stay where I was. I liked where I was, but I still wanted to work in comics. And when I first made my break, Cat and Mouse was my first published book. When I first did Cat and Mouse, I began to, do some of the conventions around, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, sort of that area of Dragon Con. Um, and I began to meet others in my region that said, "Yeah, I don't want to, I want to do comics, but I don't want to go to New York either." And so I don't even know exactly what made me think of doing it, but I'm like, "Oh, this is a writer whose work I like. He wants to write comics too, and this
Hmm.
is an artist over here. Why don't I put them together, and I can help them get work." And so kind of quite by accident, I started packaging comics. And because I had already established, as a freelance writer, I had already established a relationship with a couple of publishers. They were like, yeah, sure, send it to me. And so I became really kind of a freelance editor, because I would
Hmm.
work with the writer to, get the story and get it onto the artist. And then once that was done, I took the finished package and send it to the publisher. And that's really kind of how my job at Malibu came along, because they're like, you're already doing this stuff. Why don't
Mm.
you move to California and we'll pay you for it? I'm like, I don't really want to move to California, but this sounds like a great job. So yeah,
Right.
I'll go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Along the way, moving from place to place, I'm curious about the folks that have been sort of warm collaborators or that have supported the journey. I typically like to ask about those people that you've connected with and collaborated with that have been especially positive interactions.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with so many super duper people. I would like to say I never really collaborated with them so
Hmm.
much, but Dave Dorman and his who then wife Lorene Haynes, who has since passed on, were incredible mentors to me. I met
Mm.
them at a small show, and they just latched onto me like I was their. I'm not young enough to be their kid, but they latched onto me like, we love you. We're going to help you out. And they mentored me and helped me and instructed me and advised me in all sorts of things. Lorene ended up doing the covers for the entire Miss Fury series that I did
Hmm. Hmm.
in the 90s. And Dave actually did a cover for Silverstorm miniseries, a cover for Silverstorm miniseries that I did. So I have to shout out to them because they were super to me, incredibly supportive and encouraging, and great mentors.
Yeah.
Um, you know, probably the longest running collaborator. I haven't done anything with him in several years, but it's probably Stephen Butler. Stephen Butler was
Hmm.
my college roommate, and so we broke in together. We broke into the industry together. I did a lot of uh, bullpen kind of work for him when he was on the deadline. He was like, he'd pass me off a page and say, "Here, fill this with blacks, or do some cross hatching there," right?
Hmm.
And so I would help him out, and learned a lot about art from Stephen.
Nice,
Um,
nice.
I got to do a mini series with Paul Pelletier, who went on to DC and did phenomenal stuff at DC. Did some work at Marvel. Um, I've just been fortunate. I'm trying to think of a lot of them. Anchor Thomas Flormonti is a longtime friend of mine. He
Hmm.
has been he worked on Nightman, and so I've been able to. He worked on a little bit of Cat and Mouse, and then when I went out to Malibu, I was able to hire him to do work at Malibu. And then several years later, when I started making comic books again, Tommy was one of the first guys I reached out to and said, "Hey man, you I want to make some comics again. You want to make some comics?" He's like, "Yeah, let's make some comics." so,
Nice.
and I still do a lot of work with Tommy. So, um, yeah, I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of really cool people.
Yeah, no, you mentioned Dave Dorman, and I
Yeah,
just met him this past summer, and just a very, very nice
great
person, and
dude. Yeah,
just a very quick sketch of like a Boba Fett for me, and just
yeah,
just a yeah, just an amazing person.
fantastic guy. Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
and like I said, he and Lorraine were both just so encouraging and so supportive, and I we don't really do mentorships in comics, not really, but if I could point to a mentorship, it would be Dave and Lorraine. So
Yeah.
yeah, I will forever be grateful to the two of them.
Now, I mentioned several titles at the beginning,
Yeah.
but it also occurs to me that, as you're looking through kind of the book bins and you're finding things that you've worked on, is there anything that just you kind of light up when you run across it?
In the dollar boxes, cheap
Hmm.
boxes, it's light up, huh? Well, now I always pick up cat and mouse
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
that's probably the of all the stuff I've done, probably the most visible. Folks tend to always ask me about it. And in fact, um, up until I did the new miniseries that we just finished. That would be the one thing people are, when are you going to do it again? When are you going to do more? When are you going to do more? So I finally did that. Probably though the two that again I just never see Planet of the Apes, but the other one might be
Hmm.
Vortex. I did a
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
did a well, it was intended to be a 4-issue miniseries with Kamiko for the Elementals. Vortex was with the Elementals, and two of those issues came out, and numbers 3 and 4 were never published. When I see those, I tend to light up a little bit, like, oh, look at
Oh yeah.
this, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
those are kind of fun. And I always, it was one of those things. I always kind of regret that the last two issues didn't come out.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and that's another instance where the elementals were set in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
So when for my story for Vortex, I set it in Philadelphia, Mississippi.
Nice. Nice.
So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Also, I have some nice experience in Tennessee as well, so I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
My daughter lives in Nashville right now, so and I was born in Memphis, so I've
Nice.
got a soft spot for Tennessee.
Yeah, I used to take Beta Club kids to Nashville,
Oh,
actually, and
cool.
go to concerts there sometimes too. So yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, are
Um,
you in Alabama now?
no, no, in North Carolina.
Oh, North Carolina. Okay. I keep trying. I need to get up to I know it's not in North Carolina, it's in South Carolina, but I've never done a show in North Carolina or South Carolina at all. And I keep
Heroes
trying
Con.
to yeah, I
Yeah,
keep trying to get to
Heroes Con.
Heroes Con.
Yeah,
Yeah. So I got my fingers crossed this year might be the year. But
awesome.
yeah, I would love to do so if you got any recommendations for other shows in
Hmm.
either of those two states. And the only thing I've done in Georgia has been Dragon Con. Well, it was the Atlanta, what was it called? Atlanta Fantasy Festival at the time.
Hmm.
It was
Hmm.
run by the guy whose name I won't mention that got into a lot of a lot of legal issues and untoward stuff.
Right, right,
Um,
right.
yeah, I think it became Dragon Con, but I forget what it's called, Atlanta Fantasy and Science Fiction Festival or something. I don't remember. Anyway,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, so I'd love to get to, because I'm in Florida right now. So I would
Hmm.
love to get to, Valdosta or South Georgia somewhere. And
Yeah.
so if anybody's listening, holler at me.
Absolutely. We'll put it out there.
Yeah.
Glad to hear that you're conventioning, and I always
Uh,
like to ask about the creative
yeah.
uh, kind of directions that you're taking now as well.
I love to do conventions because I love to meet potential new readers. You
Uh-huh.
know, as a writer, um, okay, so I know comics are collectibles. I get it. I'm totally in it. I got a whole bunch of them as well. But as a writer, I want someone to read my comics,
Yeah.
right? I don't
Yeah.
want them to just say, "Oh, that's a cool cover. I'm going to buy this and frame it and put it on my wall." It's like,
Hmm.
well, but then you can't read it, right?
Right.
Like I wrote the whole story in there. Can you read it first and then frame it and put it on your wall? So I love the idea of meeting potential new readers at shows,
Hmm.
and and also one of the things I enjoy at shows is meeting other creators. Having the chance to, because creating comics, making comics, uh, is a very seclusive task, right? You sit by
Hmm.
yourself and you make a comic book, right? Whether you're
Hmm.
drawing, whether you're writing, whether you're ink and coloring, whatever, it's you're very solitary in what you're doing. So it's kind of nice to get out to the conventions and meet the others who do the same thing that you do.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it seems like most folks are friendly. That's the impression that I get.
I would say 99% of the folks are.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Yeah.
There's always that 1% though, right? You're like,
Right, right.
man, don't go talk to that dude.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So current creative directions, things that you're working on at the moment that have your creative attention, and then usually like to leave listeners with places where they can go to find out
Okay,
more about your work, your upcoming appearances, all of those sort of things.
sure. Um, so one of the things we did, and I started this just before the COVID hit. Well, I just got I wanted to make comic books again. I've been teaching a while, and I'm like, I want to make comics again. And so we started, and then I learned about Kickstarter. So I did a Kickstarter, and I'm like, well,
Hmm.
that was kind of nifty. We didn't make a lot of money, but we made a little bit of money. Got to pay for the printing. I didn't lose anything, right? I wasn't out money. I got to ship some cool comics out to people. And so I'm like, well, let's do that again, right?
Hmm.
And so next thing I know, folks are coming to me and saying, Roland, you should start, Silverline again. And I'm like, I don't
Yes,
really want to
yes.
do that. It's a lot of work and I got a full-time job, but I just want to make some comics. And so next thing I know, people were volunteering to help. Primarily, Barb Kalberg said, well, look, I was an
Hmm.
accountant. I'll keep all your books. I can eat cat and mouse for you, and I'll keep all your books. You don't have to worry about any of that. And I'm like, really? I don't have to do any of that? So Barb does all of that.
Nice,
Um,
nice.
my wife bought in hook, line, and sinker this time as well. She said, "Well, I can help you with the social media." She goes, "I'll, I can do all that, and you don't have to worry about it." She said, "Look, kind of instruct me on what you want," but she said, "I'll handle all that, and you don't have to worry about that." And others have my friend Tommy does a whole lot of stuff for me as well, and so I'm like, "Dadgummit, okay, fine." And I will say, since probably the last 3, 4 years, we've made about 50 comic books.
Nice,
And
nice.
yeah, so I will continue to do that with through Kickstarter. We'll continue to Kickstarter books. We've just taken our first books to Diamond. So Trump's #1 is so far the only thing we're doing is miniseries. I'm really, really, really heavily considering a series with Cat and Mouse. I'm just
Hmm.
not sure if I can keep up. So I may look at, I don't know, bi-monthly or quarterly or something like that to still kind
Yeah,
of make it a
yeah.
regular thing.
Hmm.
Uh, I'm just not sure I can maintain a schedule that would keep any kind of readers interested.
Yeah.
So
That would be
Trump's
great
is,
though.
yeah, I think so, and I consider it more and more because there's a lot of folks been writing about the state of the industry here in the last several weeks. And one of the common ideas I see from some of these store owners is they talk about independent comics and they say, independent comics are doing well, but the problem is everybody's doing miniseries with
Hmm.
the idea to go to trade, and that's absolutely what we've been doing, right? And he said we don't have any long running independent comics that we can get behind and say, hey, you fans, you need to come and support this. This is a good book. You need to get out. And so, I'm like, okay, well, he has a point because the only thing we're doing is, we're again, our model was to make a mini series so that we can go to trade because it seems everyone likes the trades, and we'll
Hmm.
just keep making mini series. And so that's what's got me thinking about the whole cat. I'm not sure, and so don't anyone hold me to it. Said you were going to make this a series, but I'm strongly considering it. But I
Cool.
plan to
Very
be
cool.
in Diamond with one book a month for the foreseeable future anyway, because February the release of Trump's #1 will be in shops. March we'll have Kalis #1. April will have Trump's #2. May will have Kalis #2. So we're going to go bi-monthly with them. And the idea behind that, even though they're miniseries, the idea behind that is that no one knows who we are, right? I mean, we have a very strong and very small fan base that allows us to do our Kickstarters, but it's a very small fan base. Again, I don't want it to sound like I don't appreciate them because look, it's those guys are the reason that I'm able to sit here and talk to you today that
Hmm.
I'm doing new
Hmm.
stuff. Um, but um, but we're going to do it bi-monthly so that the idea is that when #1 comes out, people have a chance to see it and go, oh, this is pretty good. Oh, #2, I can still order #2. Let me order some #2 now and let me get
Hmm.
more copies. That's the idea. Whether it works or not, I don't know. Ask me again in 6 months.
Yeah, yeah,
But that's
absolutely.
the idea.
Yeah, yeah. And it was sometime over the summer that I had Barbara Kelberg on. So
Yeah.
glad
Yeah.
to share about the work
She's
of
fantastic.
Silverline. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. We've been getting it's nice. Someone just sent me a blogger who reviews comics sent me said that he had read Trump's over the Christmas holidays and did a nice blog on it. It was very, very nice. And I'm like, and he's like, I've seen you guys at shows, but I just didn't know who you were and didn't pick up any of your books. And so I decided to give it a shot. And so he bought two complete miniseries from us at Daytona Beach Comic Con. And
Nice.
so he goes, I was very pleased with both of the miniseries, and I'm looking forward to picking up new stuff from you guys. That's the kind of thing that I like going to conventions, because I was able to talk to him. I was able to tell him
Hmm.
a little bit about the books. And then, we're talking, what is this? October, November, December, January. We're talking 4 months later. I get an email from him that says, "Hey, I picked your books up at Daytona, which was 4 months ago. I
Hmm.
read them. I enjoyed them. I made a blog about them."
Nice. Very
Yeah,
nice.
that's nice.
Yeah. Well, if you have the link handy, after our talk, I'm glad to put it in the comments as well since we've mentioned it, and
Absolutely.
that way folks can check that out and kind of follow along and
Yeah.
check out what's on the way.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can just Silverline Comics. We're pretty much on all the social medias. We have a website, silverlinecomics.com, but we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on let's see what Twitter, we're on Instagram,
Mhm.
we're on all of them, I think. So we try to get on all of them. Anytime there's a new one that comes up, we're like, well, let's get on it and see what
Yeah,
happens. And if we don't get any action there, or any traction, then we kind of abandon it a little bit. But we'll try any of them. Someone said something to me. He's like, well, are you going to get on? I think it's Blue Sky. I think it was. I'm like,
uh-huh, uh-huh.
yeah, we'll get on Blue Sky. What the heck? Let's go. If there are folks
Sure.
there that are interested in what we're doing, then we will hang around. If not, then we can say we tried it.
True, true. Very
But
true.
yeah, just look for Silverline Comics, and that's where you'll find me.
Sounds great. I'll be sure and share the links.
Thank you.
And yeah, I appreciate the conversation, the kinship over rural comics, because
That's
you're right,
right.
there were not a lot of them, and I appreciate the work you do.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you asking me to come talk to you.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Glad to have you back anytime.
Thank you.